There's two types of community property. There's community property and community property with right of survivorship. So in the example that I just gave where somebody formed the LLC and didn't name the second spouse on the articles of organization, that's community property. It's not community property with right of survivorship. Community property with right of survivorship means that both spouses have a joint interest, and that if one dies, the interest of the deceased spouse automatically passes to the surviving spouse without the need for probate. But the only way you can get community property with the right of survivorship is there has to be some document signed by the parties where the husband and wife both acknowledge that the asset is community property with right of survivorship. So if the asset is community property, meaning each spouse owns an undivided one half, but it's not community property with right of survivorship, that means if one spouse dies, the interest of the deceased spouse may not automatically transfer to the other spouse. But with a community property with right of survivorship, if one spouse dies, the interest of the deceased spouse automatically transfers to the surviving spouse without the need for a probate. So when we do an operating agreement, for example, and the owners are husband and wife and they want to own as community property, we put language in our operating agreement that says that the two people agree that their interest in the company is owned as community property with right of survivorship, and then they're signing the operating agreement, so that legally creates community property with right of survivorship. So the bottom line is, if you're married, you want to own it as community property with right of survivorship. And if it's not community property and then it's separate property, then that's fine. But each person needs to be aware that they need to make sure that the separate property is not commingled with assets of the other spouse. Because if you take separate property in the bank account that you inherited from your parents and you put that into a joint account with your spouse, you just converted that separate property into community property. So take care when you have separate property that you don't inadvertently convert it to community property.